You have to have the funding and the backing to put up your bond to say, if this mine fails, or even when we decide to close it, you're going to clean it up, but you will make it safe. So we're really excited to take this association to the next level, which is educating the public. Why are gas prices so high? And most of them don't understand that it's not the convenience store who's setting the price. They finally called for the vote. Again, this vote has to be by push of a button. Every single senator in that chamber pushed their button except for one sole Republican senator.
Welcome to Jobbers, American Energy, the podcast that tells the untold stories of the people powering America. I'm your host, Jason Case, and each month we go beyond headlines to meet the folks keeping our country running, one job at a time. Let's get into it. Miranda Hoover, thank you for doing this. Thanks for joining the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I appreciate it. Just a quick overview. I'd like to start, I always do, with a quick brain warm-up, just some fun questions for the audience to get to know you. Then I'll get into your bio. And from there, we'll kind of discuss what led you into being the state executive for Nevada, the recent shenanigans at the Nevada state legislature, and then some of the current events that are going on.
I love it. Let's do it.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Definitely a morning person.
Okay.
Early bird catches the worm.
I agree. What is your favorite restaurant in Reno, Nevada?
Land Ocean is up there, but I also love all Mexican food. So El Adobe, Anna's Taqueria, all about it.
I have a funny story for you about Land Ocean and Peter Kruger off the pod.
I already know. I believe whatever you're going to tell me.
All right. I'll ask this. It's a little modification. Usually I like to know what your favorite TV show or movie is, but I think you're more of a podcast fan. So what is one of the podcasts that you listen to regularly?
So my number one podcast at the moment is called The Big Deal Podcast by Cody Sanchez. She is actually a very good friend of one of my very good friends, which is how I got introduced to her about 4 or so years ago. She launched her podcast just within the last year, and I am absolutely obsessed with it. So anybody that is a current business owner, wants to be a business owner, is looking to buy other businesses, listen to that pod.
I've actually, just by following you on social, I've caught some of their stuff and it looks pretty cool. A lot of Las Vegas businesses that she's promoted recently. If you like that one, there's a one that I listen to called Acquired. It's about, like, it'll tell you about the kind of early onset of Amazon, or when they got into like data centers and things like that. So it kind of tells you like typically a struggle of a large business before they actually become a significantly large business. So that's a good one as well. All right. This one's more related to current events. In your opinion, what happens to the price of oil after the U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear infrastructure?
Well, anybody really with common sense, generally it would be going up. With the United States just not having as much energy infrastructure currently firing on all cylinders yet, I want to say yet, that we're still pretty beholden to what other countries are doing at the moment, but hoping that's going to change pretty soon.
Yeah, a global war and a bunch of chaos kicking off would definitely hurt the initiative of the Trump administration. I don't think that's his goal. I hope it isn't. Wars cracking off all over the world isn't going to be good for the economy or for the agenda.
No, it's not.
Now, I'm just going to kick it off by providing a brief overview of your personal and professional background. Born in Reno, Nevada.
Born, raised, and I still live there.
Okay. You received your bachelor's degree in public health from the University of Nevada, and then you went on to receive your master's degree in business administration and healthcare policy from UNR. You've worked a wide range of professional experience, including healthcare, logistics, mining, petroleum, government affairs. You're currently the co-founder and managing director of 3C House, which focuses on lobbying, media, and digital marketing. Fair?
Yep. And economic development.
You're the current successor to the wonderful Peter Kruger as the ECAN Nevada State Executive. And most importantly, you're a big advocate for the hardworking men and women in downstream energy and our convenience store industries in Nevada. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I appreciate you doing this. Can you tell us, what was it like growing up in Reno, and how did you end up becoming the state executive for Nevada?
Well, it's a pretty funny roundabout story. Nothing in my life really has been that linear, which I think just adds to the breadth of fun and experience and amazing people that I've gotten to just meet over the years. But I'm the oldest of 5 kids. All of my siblings still live in Reno. 2 are still in college. And my dad has been a serial small business owner my entire life. And he started that really even early into his 20s. And my mom's a nurse, always has been. And so it's been fun growing up in a household where we have the small business side, someone who's legitimately signing the front of paychecks with dozens and dozens of employees over the years. And then from my mom's side, healthcare, working in a very corporate structure. And so that was always really fun, as my parents never said, you must believe this way or you must think this way. It was laying out situations and examples of, even politics at that time or current events happening or even things going on in their life and in work. And they would kind of lay it out for us and we would have a conversation about it. And they would essentially let us decide what we believed or what we thought was kind of the right path, given the tools that they gave us growing up and, showing us the right way, not just always telling us. So that was just a really good framework for me as I got older and had a true passion and still do for small business, economic development, growth, taking care of your family, healthcare, all of those kind of different aspects. And so I initially thought I was going to go to medical school or be a nurse. Showed up to my very first orientation day up at the University of Nevada, Reno for nursing, walked into a classroom of probably 40 other people. And the coordinator says, unless you are going to be studying 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, this is not the room for you. And I went, not me. I'm out. I'm done. I love getting to do tons of different things kind of all at the same time.
So you don't like to be pigeonholed into one thing.
I can't do it. I can't be tied down. And so I knew that wasn't the right path for me. So I was trying to figure out the best way to bring my love for business and my eventual real love and passion for political stuff, which really for me is more policy based and people and healthcare into one realm. And so that's when I decided to pursue public health, which really is a policy, data driven type healthcare outcomes and figuring out how current events really impact that. And so that was really fun. And I graduated actually a year early from the university. Took a semester off to work full time at the Nevada legislature. Back in 2015, I was the youngest person ever hired to work in the Senate Majority Leader's office, which thank you, which has since changed. And I love all the people that have come out of that office since. But that was a really fun experience. And between starting to work on campaigns in 2012, which was part of my senior year of high school volunteer requirement, and that's kind of what kicked me off into this now love of policy and policy wonking, if you will.
Understood. Just to backtrack a second. So it sounds like you definitely have your parents' impact on you professionally, dad from a business standpoint, mom from a healthcare standpoint, probably both of them from a current event, politics, policy standpoint. Which one are you more like personally?
This is so funny. I have had people in the business world, in the healthcare world, and then even in the political world, because my dad did run for office many moons ago, who have said, you look a lot like your dad today, or you look a lot like your mom today. You sound a lot like your dad today. You sound a lot like your mom today. And so I really think I'm a pretty good mix of both of them. It depends on the situation, frankly, depends on the day. But I feel really proud that I do feel very like 50-50 of them, which obviously, again, that sways a little bit from day to day. But I mean, we also grew up camping and fishing and going places where there was no cell service all across Nevada and California, which we loved. And so getting to spend time with your family as well was really important. And that's also always just been very ingrained in me. That's
cool. I think about that just because we have little kids now. Mm-hmm. And as they develop, like at first, everybody would say that my daughters look more like me. And I'm like, ugh. Sorry. Now they're looking more like their mom. And I hope that trend continues. Mom's a lot more beautiful than I am. So I hope my girls look like that. But their personalities, like at times I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so my wife. And then at times she's like, that is your daughter. So you kind of get this mold, and it's just fun to see how that continues to progress as they get older.
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny too, because my siblings, we'll sit around for family dinner, which I'm grateful we do almost every Sunday night. And my dad and I will start talking, politics, and my mom, who now works for the VA, will start telling me updates happening from the national level from the VA, because they do, I think it's biweekly phone calls or something nationally, all the way down to everybody that works at the VA across the country. And we'll start talking some policy shifts and this issue's happening and this person's involved. And I can see all of my siblings just rolling their eyes. Like their eyes are in the back of their head. They're so sick and tired of
They don't want to hear it.
politics. And they're like, we hate this. Can you please talk about something else? And so it's pretty funny.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can see that. There's my family. It's interesting because we grew up, not that anybody was involved in politics, but we openly talked about it. I would call it more current events than anything. We didn't get in heated debates, and there are people from both sides of the aisle. So for me, I didn't think it was ever taboo to talk about, just because I don't get in shouting matches. If I have a disagreement with somebody, I'm like, oh, well, maybe you have a different perspective. I'd like to hear on that, or vice versa. But I've noticed, like with other people, it's religion and politics. We don't talk about this. I'm like, you can talk about it civilly. You don't have to argue about these things, and you also don't have to like treat it as a debate. If you really want to convince somebody about your position, I feel like just try to plant a seed. Maybe they hear something that they haven't heard before, and maybe that can develop down the road, as opposed to like, I need to win this debate to prove you wrong.
Absolutely. And I very much grew up in that exact same household. We would talk current events, and there'd be something on the news, I don't know what the media outlets that we were really watching back then. I know definitely like ABC and just all those different things. And I remember sitting on the couch with my dad going, why is this happening? And what's going on here? And like, why does this company not like that company? And, different things like that. But again, allowing the conversation to happen and them to be true discussions and talking about the who, the what, and the why, and the outcome. And I really think that's made me a better, not only person, but a better lobbyist, because I love learning from anybody. I don't care where they came from. I don't care what they do, their experience and their true passions and their opinions about things. Because at the end of the day, I don't care what side of the aisle a piece of policy came from. There's always a way to make it better. And you're only going to make it better when all of the stakeholders are at the table.
Yeah. And it's kind of a math equation at the end of the day, too, right? If there's a policy either that you agree or disagree with, you have to get a certain size group on board with that to go anywhere. So screaming at people, hitting them over the head with a hammer, debating them may not be the way to get like a consensus behind a topic. Just a good old fashioned heated debate, respectful debate. So you get introduced to business, you get introduced to politics, you graduate early. From there, what's your next progression in your professional career?
So at that point, I still was very much of the opinion that I might go to medical school because, unfortunately, at least up at UNR, there was no kind of beautiful medium for policy and politics meets healthcare or even business. And a really good friend of mine at the time had just gotten accepted to the Texas Tech Medical School, which what they were doing there is brilliant. Your first year of quote medical school, you actually join the MBA program. And when you graduate with your medical degree, which it's 5 years later instead of just 4, you walk out not only with your medical degree, but you walk out with your MBA.
Oh,
and
good.
to truly start getting physicians to understand more of a business side, I thought that was genius. It's been running full steam ahead ever since, but that's something I wish a school in Nevada had, or even more of a, go get your MD and then also learn about something else. They had then started kind of an MD meets like an MPA, and that's what I have, a Master's of Public Administration, which is that policy side. And so as I was meeting with people and kind of trying to figure out what my next move was going to be, do I apply for medical school and take the MCAT? Do I go get figure out my full-time job? Do I do something else? And at the time, just getting out of the 2015 legislative session, I was fortunate enough to meet and become friends with a lot of elected officials all across the state and friends who, work in healthcare. And the Affordable Care Act had recently become law. And so there was a lot of conversation and obviously controversy surrounding that. And I just told people, I don't ever want to get into a profession where I'm treating my client or my patient like a number. I want to be able to treat them like a person. And so everyone I talked to had said, I don't quite think becoming a doctor is in your future at the moment, because you're going to be treating patients for 6 to 7 minutes. From the time they walk in, you say your hellos, they tell you what's wrong with them, you make a diagnosis, and they walk out potentially with their prescription. And that's it. And that's not what I wanted. But it was really nice. A dear friend who's a former board of regent told me, whether it's in 2 years or if it's in 10 years, if you still want to go to medical school, I will write you your first letter of recommendation. So it's 10 years later, not looking for that letter of recommendation. So that was great. But instead, I decided to go pursue my MBA, knowing that I could take the policy side and add in the healthcare side, as well as kind of the business side. So all of my extra credits essentially were healthcare policy specific or business policy specific. And I also was really fortunate because I had, I want to say, been a pretty good student during undergrad. I had met these professors who, were doing things well and beyond just the undergraduate level. And so I was actually accepted into a very high level healthcare policy class my first semester during graduate school, even though technically I didn't have all the credentials to do it. But the professor teaching the class had asked one of my undergrad professors if I would be okay in it. And she goes, 100%, 5 stars, let her do it. And so I got to sit in that class with 4 physicians who were all finishing up medical school. They were already out doing residencies all across the state, going and playing OBGYNs in our little small areas of Ely and Tonopah, a guy who had already gotten his business administration degree but wanted to learn about healthcare, and then a gal who had worked for the county health department for over 30 years who wanted to get her MPA. And so between really the 7 of us, I got to sit in that class and learn from all of these different people. And so I did that for 2 years. Right as I started my master's degree, I actually came into my dad's logistics company. I had told him since I was about 14, I kept saying, I don't know how I'm going to learn to be a business owner or learn about small business or be able to advocate for small business unless I have worked at a small business and I would run a small business. Yeah. And so when I was 21 and I just graduated with my undergrad, my dad, I remember it was December, said to me, okay, January, whatever day it was, you're going to be starting at the company. And so I started really in sales, doing account management and account executive. Was the only woman working at the company at the time. Definitely the youngest by far. And I just had a blast. And within a year and a half, took this, smaller career company that had just been hit really, really hard through the recession and took it from about a 14-person employed company to a 48-person logistics company where we had a large warehouse. I had landed the first account from the Amazon to post office in the entirety of Northern Nevada. And so we had a bunch of big box trucks. We ran 363 days a year, only days off for New Year's and Christmas. I worked all hours of the day and then left for 3 hours a couple times a week to go do my master's classes. And then I was right back in the office. And I love that. It was extremely hard, but definitely worth the experience and the people I met. And so then fast forward to finishing up my master's degree. It's 2018. And I sold my dad's company in April of that year, and I graduated with my master's in May of that year. And my dad was ready to retire. And so we made the mutual decision as I went, I really love this. I've learned a lot, but I'm ready for the next thing.
Iteration.
Yeah, I'm ready for the next thing. And so that's really just what kind of pushed me getting more involved with NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. I got to become the state vice PAC chair for a while, get really involved in more small business issues, and then took a little bit of time off, which I had never done before, but was nice, and visited my grandparents and truly spent some time with them. And then I ended up becoming a full-time lobbyist towards the end of that year, August, September 2018. And that's where I met Peter Kruger.
Awesome.
And the rest is history. And I'm just kidding.
Before we get to Peter, so your dad's logistics company, were you guys working with like 3PL third-party logistics handlers? Or did you guys have your own trucks, your own drivers, or was it a little bit of both?
It was a little bit of both. So we rented our trucks. We had 26-foot trucks that we leased, but then we also owned one 12-foot and one 16-foot. We had a 17,000 square foot warehouse that we actually had another very large international company leasing the space from us. But eventually I started bringing clients in that not only needed that, small business to business type movement, but also wanted to actually store their products. And so I've seen some very interesting pallets brought into my warehouse from interesting French pottery that I had never seen before. And so you're trying to be very careful with the handling. But I also learned a lot about OSHA and hazmat at that time because there was a client that I was really trying to bring in that only at the time had East Coast warehouses that they were working with, nothing on the West Coast, but they were trying to expand their service range to get more into Home Depot and Lowe's and all of those types of hardware services. And so they were looking at my warehouse and they brought me a 53-foot entire loaded truck of this OSHA hazmat product. And I learned a lot about that. And unfortunately, the deal ended up falling through, even though they had already shipped me a truck. That's a totally different story that I would love to tell.
I can imagine. Yeah.
But I got to learn a lot from kind of all those different aspects. You're not only learning about the truck and, what type of fuel to put in it and, what is DEF? You can have people to this day be like, you know what DEF is? Yeah, diesel exhaust fuel. I know exactly what that is. I know exactly how much per gallon it costs. But you learn so much about trucks and how to run a warehouse and how to manage clients and all of that. And so, by the time that we left, I had 7 26-foot box trucks that were running 18 hours every day. And then we had the 12 and the 16-foot truck that we would use anywhere from 4 to 6 days a week, plus all the courier stuff that we still did all the way from Tahoe to Winnemucca, all the way down to Gardnerville.
That's awesome. And you guys actually went through an exit. Dad was happy. Got to end on a high note, liquidity event, and
we did
work with his daughter.
Yes, it was very interesting. And it's funny because I think back on it now of the, people always tell you don't work with your family, don't work with your friends. And after I got done with that, I was like, I'm never working with my family. I'm never working with my friends again. Like, it's just hard and it's a different layer. But now I do. My business partner, she's my best friend. And so it's different and it's working out really well. And we both love it. And so I think also being young and kind of being thrown into a position that I knew nothing about and like being thrown into this company that I only had ever kind of had an arm's length from, it gave me a lot of opportunity to decide, like, am I going to sink or am I going to swim here? And I decided to swim.
And I think it gives you some appreciation that you wouldn't have had for your father or for your family, kind of because you get a peek behind the curtains, go, man, there's a lot going on here. Didn't realize Dad had to deal with all this. That's really cool.
Probably where my gray hair started, frankly.
So the hairstylist is for you. You'll never know. Christy just had hers done a couple days ago. Now back to Peter Kruger. So how did you actually meet Peter Kruger and how did you guys end up kind of working together before you ended up taking over for him as the state executive?
Peter doesn't remember this, but we actually met for the first time in 2015. And it was during the state commerce tax fight. So the
Sandoval?
That was a Sandoval, yes, Roberson debacle where the Republicans ended up sweeping both the state Senate and the state Assembly for the first time in forever. And no one saw it coming. No one, not even the Republicans. And the state and the voters had just beat the margins tax, which was on the ballot the previous November. So November of 2014. And then 2015 session starts and we have this commerce tax bill get introduced. Did the exact same thing that the margins tax was going to do. They just changed the name. And it was really interesting. I mean, you had the entire business community all across the state, every small business, all of that. And a lot of those small businesses thought that the fight was over because they had defeated the margins tax with all of the business groups. And yet we got to the end of April, and I'll never forget the bill hearing being scheduled on Memorial Day, which, most people think, oh, it's Memorial Day. There's nothing happening at the session. Oh, no. We work 120 days, all in the weekends, every holiday. So that's when they decided to do the hearing. And Peter, because he was the state exec for petroleum and he had some other associations, very pro-business clients, was actively involved in those conversations. And it was 2015 and we're, all of us as staff were sitting there not allowed to be engaged and, the political side of things, we've got a job to do. But I remember, calling my dad on my break and saying, they're doing the commerce tax at this time today. And he was at some political breakfast. And I remember him jumping in the car, rushing down to get to Carson City. And of course, the hearing room was packed. Yeah. And my dad, to this day, still tells me that he got there a little bit late. Not that they had started yet, but the room was completely packed. They had multiple overflow rooms. And Peter was sitting in the very front row. And he saw my dad coming. They had met a few times previously, but nothing, super in depth yet. But Peter had gotten up and gave my dad his seat because at the time, my dad was one of the presidents for NFIB in the state. And so he gave him his seat. And, my dad told me that story later on. And I remember going and talking with Peter, in the hallways. And I still tell him that story. And he's like, yeah, I remember. I'm like,
yeah, I don't know if you do.
Because he's still like, what year did we meet? And I go, 2015. He goes, okay.
The commerce tax, for those that aren't familiar with it, tax in Nevada, essentially you're exempt under 4 million of annual revenue. So if you're a big convenience store conglomerate, you could theoretically incorporate each business by itself. And if you're under 4 million, avoid it. That's a hell of an administrative burden to carry just to avoid, in my opinion, an unnecessary tax.
Yes. And up till just a couple of years ago, even if you didn't hit that $4 million threshold, you were still required to file a form. To prove that you didn't have that $4 million.
And unlike other taxes that are pretty straightforward, like excise taxes or sales taxes, where you can, essentially it's charged to you, you can accrue it, you can pass it on. It's either a wash or it isn't charged to you, you accrue it, and then you pay the taxable entity. Commerce tax is so confusing the way they went about it that it's actually really difficult to invoice customers based on a commerce tax. If it's a government entity, they refuse to pay it. Some customers, if they're big enough, they refuse to pay it. So you kind of have to bake it into your cost of goods sold, which is not how a tax should be really handled. It was very confusing. The business community, I think, is still mad at Sandoval over this. It was a bad idea, in my opinion, my personal opinion.
And there's still Republicans who voted for that tax 10 years ago, who are still going to different lunches and dinners and events and still having to hear from constituents about how dare they vote and have, voted on that. And I think that is important, but I also think it's important to remember that there were a lot of deals cut behind the scenes. And I know quite a few of them as to what happened, why, where that money actually was going. There's some interesting parallels here. If you go and look back at how much money Tesla was actually getting from a tax incentive perspective, and I don't want to oust anybody here, but if you go look at some of those numbers, you can clearly see how and why they came up with those specific figures. And we all, for the last 10 years, have been somewhat trying to backtrack on some of that. Modified business tax is a big one that they've tried to kind of roll back. There's the not having to report anymore if you make under that $4 million threshold. There's the trying to raise up the threshold potentially to $5 million, all those little things. And we're all eating it up. And you're right. There's no way to pass that along. But it's also very hard to then explain to brand new legislators who have never been in the building before, weren't there for those conversations, why there are issues with it, and then trying to convince them why we should continue to try to roll some of it back or even introduce, something else that would help to roll it back, make it less hurtful to business owners, because it is a lot of paperwork, as you said.
Yeah, it just felt like a sneaky tax. I mean, it very much was a sneaky tax. It's like, it's not a sales tax. It's this weird gray area. And then, it's complicated depending on the size of your business or how you structure your business if you want to avoid it, and very complicated to accrue and pass it on like you would any other tax. So not a fan.
No. So when you decide to run for office, that will be our first bill.
No, I'll be a pastor before I be a politician, but I'm a big fan of holding our elected representatives accountable. And I love the fact that people remember. You should. It's like, hey, you push this. This was really bad for the business community, and I'm going to remind you about it. That's accountability. Accountability is good for people. They learn that way.
It was interesting, even going into the 2019 legislative session. So 4 years later, 2018, we're having conversations during campaigns where us as the business community, and I was fortunate enough at the time to represent the Reno Sparks Chamber of Commerce, who still one of my favorite clients ever, but sitting there amongst all the business owners and the chambers and the trade associations and everyone going, we are not going to support X, Y, and Z because of their support for the commerce tax and because of how anti-business they have acted during the past 2 legislative sessions. And us as the business community bear a lot of weight. I actually was given an interesting statistic this morning that the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce and all of their members in Nevada, from an employee standpoint, they actually represent 1/3 of the total population of Nevada. When you think about that,
that makes sense. I would believe that.
That's crazy, right? But then you go, okay, well, all the more reason why it's so important that us as the business community are represented and are always on the same page, because we truly can make a difference. We can change things.
As long as you're informed and you care enough to actually be informed on the policies and whether or not these individuals support those policies. I am not a big fan of the party system. I think that Democrat traditionally and what a Democrat is today is very different. Same thing on the Republicans. So I think it's a good idea to be informed on the policies and hold the individuals accountable. They are supposed to be elected representatives, so that if they're not going along with your position on a policy, you should be vocal about it.
Absolutely.
and hold them accountable.
There are people on, I want to say, all three sides of the aisle, because we've got some interesting IAP people and nonpartisans, but getting along with the majority of them, because they're pretty moderate, I want to say, for the most part. They can see both sides to an issue, but there's also people on both sides of the aisle that you just can't work with. And that's unfortunate. They're so far over on one side, but also don't understand the policy, don't understand the true process. And when I mean process, I mean like the actual inner workings of a business, the operations, signing the front of a paycheck, those types of processes.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to learn. And that's the hard part.
No, they just add more regulatory tape and it gets more complicated and burdensome. Yeah, that's why we spend most of our time, I feel like, trying to defeat bad bills as opposed to pushing legislation through. There's enough laws and regulations out there. Let's try to get rid of some bad ones. Back to Peter Kruger. So shortly after that, you actually ended up working with Peter at the time, Nevada Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association. Now it's known as the Energy and Convenience Association of Nevada. And that was during Christy, my wife's year as president. So how did you go from that to working with the Nevada Mining Association and then end up kind of coming back as a state executive? How did you navigate that path?
It's a pretty funny path. And I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. So I got to work with Peter and his firm back in 2018 all the way through 2020. And I just loved meeting all the people that were part of it. Still do. I want to say. Yeah. And it was so fun for me to learn and get to take things, not just during session where you're mainly working on state projects and issues, but then even after session, you really are the person in the state of Nevada for everything city, county, state, and even federal. And I remember even then there was a lot of issues in regards to convenience stores, whether it be an alcohol or tobacco issue. There was a huge signage issue that I worked on from a digital signage perspective, and having some nonprofit groups be very anti any type of digital sign in downtown Reno. And so I learned more about lumens in about 3 months than I ever
really wanted to. Yeah.
And so then it was really fun to get to translate a lot of that into everyone's everyday business and say, what makes sense for you? Why do you do X the way that you currently do? And then even bring that back to elected officials, the stakeholders, city engineers, those types of people who are the ones actually pushing those types of policies, writing the technical language for it, and really getting to advocate for small business. That really is my lifeblood and passion, getting to support small business owners and helping them to grow if that's what they so desire, but always fighting for their right to exist.
And working, I think, like for the downstream distribution industry, you have the convenience store type, which is it's unique because you've got car washes, you've got alcohol, you've got tobacco, you've got merchandising. Then, of course, you've got the fuel component, but you take that to like more of the wholesale side. You've got terminals, you got pipelines, you got rail facilities. It's a pretty wide breadth of topics that you have to find consensus on. Because what might work for, let's say, just an independent convenience store operator may not work for a larger company who's integrated at the wholesale side. And then if you even take us as a group and compare that to maybe like a larger midstream or refining, oftentimes where we're at a disconnect. So trying to find that local, state, and federal consensus can be difficult.
Yeah, but honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because again, that's how you try to make really good policy. And it's probably a controversial statement, but I even have told the business community during session is when both sides, and I look at both sides as being the business owners and the business community kind of versus sometimes the unions, but some of the very kind of left-wing conservationalist type people. When both sides of the aisle are unhappy, that's the best policy. Yeah. And obviously, I'm always here to advocate for my businesses. But at the end of the day, when we've worked so hard and pushed so hard, and so has that other side, and we both walk away kind of in a draw, that's the best form of policy that I see, because you get really nitty gritty and into the weeds, but also knowing that it can be changed.
I know from the state association standpoint, we're really excited about it because we could still work with you. And also you could understand the oil position as it relates to mining associations. Could you just briefly discuss what was it like working at the mining association? I know we went on a tour. We actually got to go to a refinery. That was pretty cool. But what were some of the, I guess, more fun topics that you got to cover, things that you got to do when you were with NVMA?
One thing I want to kind of back up on for a moment too is the whole reason that I ever even got the job at the Nevada Mining Association is because of the people I had met during the 2015 legislative session. I was with Peter and his firm, and then COVID hit. And I just had this fire inside of me that was telling me I needed to go work in a hospital for a while. I just needed to, again, very part mom, dad.
Grew up with it.
And so I took all of the PTO that I had from the firm, because I never took PTO. I would go work Monday through Thursday with Peter's firm, and I would go work at the hospital Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I did that for 3 months. And then I finally had to sit down with Peter and just say, I gotta go. I feel like I need to go do this, even if it's temporary. And so he, of course, completely understood where I was, but also it's important to note we have remained friends since then. And I love our relationship. And I call him Papa Pete. He's like my grandpa, who I just love to death. And so I went and worked at a hospital for 8 months during COVID. And everybody says, wow, you went into medicine at an interesting time. And oh boy, was it an interesting time. Because of my experience and frankly, my degrees, which that's not everything in life, but because of the internships I had purposely thrown myself into and the policy projects, I mainly was on the floor with people that had suicide ideation or had just gotten out of surgery. I was kind of like a babysitter for patients, but I also worked hand in hand with the nurses and also the CNAs. So I would be in a room with patients and helping them do anything and everything, turning them, moving them, making sure they're eating. So I really got to see the entire process. And there was a point in time where this hospital on a Friday fired all of their managers, just out of the blue, fired all of their managers, then told all of the directors, which they have over 20 departments at this hospital, and they had 7 directors. So all of them were overseeing more than one department, except for one person. And so the very next week, the directors were told that they were going to have to absorb every single policy that the managers were previously writing, reviewing, and doing. And all of the directors had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know how to write a policy. They didn't know what was going on. And so I would be sitting on the floor on my days, and I would have directors come and hunt me down and find me and say, so-and-so told me that you know how to write policy and you know this and this. And so I would help them write their policy while I was on the floor. And I actually got to help them revise their emergency room policy for the first time in 20 years. And I got to help them rewrite that and do all that during COVID while we're swapping departments. So we've got COVID wings and everything going on. It was a crazy time. Well, in the midst of all of this, so for over 8 months, one of my very good friends became the president of the Nevada Mining Association and became president in January of 2020. So also an interesting time. And he and I had met in the 2015 legislative session. He's an attorney and was also lobbying full time. And we met when I was staff and had just always stayed in touch. And he really had been, really trying to convince me to come work with him, come work with the Mining Association. And he just felt that there was so much good that we could do together and on the same team. And so, it took a good 8 months, probably a little bit more, because he was trying to get me to come join even when I was with Peter. But finally, in April of 2021, I left the hospital and accepted a full-time position at the Nevada Mining Association to be their membership services manager. And just based on, the job alone and the job title, all I did for the most part was talk to members. And that was one thing I loved, because again, it was getting to support those small businesses, a lot of them small, but then also learning about mining, which, if you grew up in Nevada and you had your 4th grade class, a little bit about mining, but you don't really know about mining, especially living in Reno or living in Vegas. And so getting to go on tours, taking legislators on tours, getting to help members grow their current portfolios, get them introduced to mines. And also one thing that was really fun for me was every single week for the entirety of the almost 2 years that I was there, I had a different country calling me. Canada, Mexico, South Africa, because Nevada actually has the best safety laws and the best bonding and reclamation laws in the entire country in regards to mining. And these countries wanted to know how we did it and what's the process, because obviously they are very different compared to the US.
They want our best practices.
They do. They want us all, which I don't know. I kind of want to keep that as a best kept secret across the US, but that was really, really fun. And so from that, I ended up taking over as chief of staff and also doing business development for Nevada Mining. and, getting to learn a lot, getting to do a lot, really building for the first time a supply chain group that was all of the supply chain directors for the big mines across the state, to also then talk from the logistical standpoint, knowing that, Nevada, we're our own island. We don't have any water that's around us. We don't exactly have the best train system. So how do you continue to move raw materials in and out of the state? At the time, there was a lot of port issues also happening in Oakland and LA. And I gotten to learn a lot about that when I had my logistics company, because I had the same issues. And so then getting to talk more with Nevada's GoEd and their directors of business and industry, and trying to figure out, this is an issue for everybody across Nevada, not just mining, not just logistics. But it was really fun getting to be there and meet all the people. And I'm fortunate to still have many friends that still work at NVMA, as well as our members, as yourself. But it's really like a family, just like ECAN is.
We're big proponent of NVMA. If you do any business with mining in Nevada, you should be a member. If you're not, great people like Miranda that you can work with. Backtracking to what you kind of discussed with healthcare, I think it's true for pretty much every business industry out there. There's a difference between working in the business and working on the business. Sounds like you came in at a time when they were limiting their staff because of what was going on with the entire world at the time. And you had to take a hard look at working on the business as opposed to working in the business. Because at some point, it's kind of like the tail's wagging the dog and you're just keeping up with the day to day. And you never stop and say, hold on, time out. We haven't dusted off this emergency document in 20 years. And we're kind of in the middle of an emergency right now. So we might want to rethink this. Maybe this isn't appropriate.
Right.
Just to use us as an example. Our bylaws were so old at one point in time, we're looking at them, we're like, so to call a board meeting, we actually have to call it via telegram. I don't think that's how we call board meetings anymore. So we might want to update this document. And when you're just dealing with, whether it's small family business, big, small independent business, whatever it is, you do really need to stop every now and again and work on the business and not just carry on with the day to day. So that's probably cool that they get somebody new, younger, tenacious that wants to help. So you're not just helping with like putting out the fires, the 911 in the day. We're also saying, let's take a look at this from we're working on the business perspective so that moving forward, you're not carrying this 20-year-old document into the next decade.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, it's a good thing that Nevada still has the original Pony Express stops, because otherwise I don't know how you guys were calling board meetings, but it totally is. And I absolutely love and adore the people at the Mining Association. And I just threw myself into every opportunity I possibly could from the time that they bought a building a few years ago while I was there. Like, I was painting the ceilings. I was cleaning things, painting walls, putting molding in.
Is it Midtown? Is that where they're built?
It is. It's right by Virginia Lake.
Okay.
Actually, and people still give me a hard time about this because I identified the building as being for sale. And it's 2 blocks from my house. Would walk the 2 blocks. And so it's still fun for me to get to drive by there pretty regularly, obviously right by my house. But to just see, actually see the work of all the people for over 100 years. And the association's been around now, I can't even remember, 115, I want to say. But seeing truly the hard work that every person across the state who's ever been involved in mining, who is a miner, who is an administration in a mine, who is a vendor and provides fuel, provides, even haircuts. We've got people that are barbers that are part of the Mining Association because they're a barber in Elko or they're a barber in Ely. And those services are necessary.
Bus companies just busing the miners from where their parking lot is to where they actually work every day. It's like that. It's a big ecosystem that supports those mines.
It really is. And it was important that we represented all of those people. I mean, even their annual convention, they have over 700 people that show up in Lake Tahoe every year. And it is just an amazing, amazing event. And so you're able to go. Yeah. Highly recommend it.
We've been to it. I would recommend it as well. It's awesome. And I think, I'm obviously biased. I'm big on the oil industry, but there's some really cool industries out there. Mining's so cool. If you haven't had a chance, go to a mine site, take a tour. We were lucky enough to actually see a refinery pour at a gold mine.
Yeah, the gold pour.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was actually 70% silver, though. Remember that? Yeah, 30% gold. And then they re-refine it after they take it out of there. It was awesome. So if you don't know anything about mining, first of all, if you don't grow it, you mine it. Every American born requires a lot of mined material. And Nevada does it really, really well. So well that other countries are calling to find out what our best practices are, particularly on reclamation.
Yes, exactly. And it was interesting. I just in the last couple days visiting Ely, I got to take a trip up to the old Ward mine, which if you have the opportunity to go hike it or take a side-by-side up, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely gorgeous. But I stumbled across the actual door to the old mine, which it's an abandoned mine. I hope Endom and Emshad don't get mad at me, but I did open the door. I didn't go inside. Also, there's no signage out there, so they might want to get on that about that's her. But I was able to open the door and actually take a video of the entirety of what I could see at the, from that perspective. And it's just so cool. That was the entry point for them to get inside the mountain. Getting to go see an active mine, you should definitely go do open pit. You should also do underground, but it's also cool to see an abandoned mine. And you're going to go with actual officials and, people who can keep you safe. But it is just so wild to think that there are mines everywhere. There's hundreds of mines across the state of Nevada. I read a statistic the other day, almost 80,000 mining claims that are still just kept across the state of Nevada. And maybe 90% of them, will just never be used.
I've said this before on this podcast. We're lucky. We're blessed that we grew up in America. We have raw materials here. We should be accessing those raw materials here. Shouldn't be relying on that coming from other countries. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion, I also think that we do it smarter, we do it safer, we do it better. Other countries may disagree, but I'm happy to put the statistics up to support that. And Nevada is the epicenter of that. I mean, the West in general, really, between Arizona, Nevada, Utah's got a lot of mining capabilities that they're not accessing. Carbon County, Utah used to be the old, it was how Elko is today is what Carbon County used to be back when they were doing a lot more coal mining. Similar to West Virginia, that whole economic downturn, you can see it. You can see it with the people, you can see it with the town. It's really disheartening. And if they would just lean in, coal's a great source of energy. We have some really great coal in Utah. So hopefully with this new administration, if they take a different turn, and they also celebrate the safety and they celebrate the reclamation, because I feel like there's a massive information vacuum that isn't being filled when you don't just chop out a mountain and leave it the way it is. There's a lot that goes into mining. And I think if people understood it, they would appreciate it more.
I fully agree. And for anybody that's interested in what it actually takes to open a mine, from the safety, bonding, requirement of reclamation in this state, we at mining, and I'm sure they still have it somewhere, but on a huge, probably 6 foot tall poster, probably I would say minimum of 60 feet long in 10-point font, the entire process for how you actually open up a mine. And minimum, it's a 10-year process, minimum. And you have to have the funding and the backing to put up your bond to say, if this mine fails, or even when we decide to close it, you're going to clean it up. You're going to make it into a lake, or you're going to make it into some type of outdoor recreational activity, but you will make it safe. Yep. Sparks Marina, greatest example of reclamation.
There's probably people that live on the Sparks Marina that don't even realize that.
Yes, I wouldn't advise swimming in it, but it is beautiful to walk around.
It looks nice. Great reclamation project. One of the last mines that Christy and I went to, actually, we were driving in, and it kind of looked like, Star Nursery or Moon Nursery. It's actual plant nurseries, and there were 6 of them as we were driving in. We're asking the guy, he was the head of the reclamation. We're like, so what's going on with all that? And he's like, well, that's the indigenous plant life. We plant these nurseries, so that because they're kind of reclaiming as they continue with the mining, which I love that process. So they're putting the plant nurseries in there, and they had some wildlife. They had some bighorn sheep. So they have helicopter guys coming out, shooting bighorn sheep with net cannons. They'd airlift them, move them off site. And then if they got too close to the mining, they do it over and over again. And then you've also got the air cannons for the birds. So that way, if you're stripping, materials and there's chemicals out there that you don't want the bird life getting close to, we were out there and they're shooting these cannons off and we're freaking out. What the hell was that? He's like, that's just to make sure that none of the birds get hurt. So they go really, I think, above and beyond to try to take care of the land and restore the land as close as they can as its original state. But our modern way of life requires a lot of raw materials. So
it does. And I mean, just, one more added thing for Mining Association is they have a safety committee, and they give out annual safety awards every year. And it is just so incredible, the work that our mines are doing. And really their mantra is that they want you to get home the same way that you came to work.
Yeah.
They want you to get home. They're not in it for any other reason. Safety is their number one priority. And from the environmental side, their environmental committee is absolutely incredible. The experts that are on that, from BLM that understand sage grouse and golden eagles and, any and all plant life and what it's going to take for you to open a mine, and, what the rules are. And you can't be a mile within a golden eagle's nest and different things like that most people wouldn't even think of, all goes into mining.
Yeah. And hopefully they can keep all that, but just shorten the timeline so that they can actually access these materials a lot quicker and not have like I couldn't think of, hey, we can do this project. We have funding. We've got a plan in place strategically. All right, 10-year timeline before you can actually start going. That's too long.
It's a long time.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to win the AR arms race with that sort of timeline. So after the Mining Association, you come back to the Petroleum Association. I think, with a bunch of us that were really excited to have you back because we had worked with you in the past. We had continued working with you at the Mining Association. Peter had talked about succession. He had a few ideas. I just don't think there was an option that fit for his timeline or whatever he was looking for. So when you actually came on board, we were super excited. Peter was actually the first pod that we did. So how are things going now for you, business partners on the lobbying, marketing, media side, but also how do you think it's going for the state association?
So I think it's going great. And I do want to back up for a moment here so I left the Mining Association in early 2023. And I left to go take a job to be the executive director of the Rock Foundation, which unfortunately is no longer in existence, but running a multi-million-dollar foundation for the largest orthopedic center in Northern Nevada. And I loved healthcare. And it also gave me the opportunity to truly run a business. I had a board of directors to answer to and to guide, very similar to every trade association. But I did get to go do that for 2 years. And it, at the time was my absolute dream job if I wasn't going to go just fully work for myself. But then it's also funny to mention that when I left the firm with Peter back in 2020, I had one healthcare client who I have brought in, was really like, my client, was my baby. And I love that client, refused to allow me to leave the firm without me taking them with me. And so I actually started 3C House back in 2020 and had one client. And at the time, there wasn't a ton of stuff that was having to be boots on the ground day to day. It was a lot of background work and meetings and paperwork kind of stuff, but to advocate efficiently for that. Yeah. And so I had them for the longest time until just last year when I took my 3C government affairs firm, which Charlie had worked for me previously, my business partner, as a contractor to be my boots on the ground. And then we took her marketing and media company that she's had almost 10 years now and decided that we're stronger together and would be better together. Because we know so many times with business owners, they're so busy running the business, they don't have the time to do the marketing. They don't have the time to do social media. For those that don't have true sales departments, that's the way that they potentially get new clients and new customers, is through social media these days. And so we're not only able to take the clients that she had and bring them into our firm and continue to do all the things that we've been doing, which I'm very proud are all small businesses, really across the West Coast, but also then being able to offer additional services to our government affairs clients, which again, are all businesses, except for just a few that are not from just an association perspective. But we were really able to kind of level up in that to start offering that. And so again, Peter and I have been friends now for over 10 years. And we just always kind of talked about the potential for what it would look like for me to, one day take over for him, if you will. And, he's joked about it, I would say, for the last 4 years that, it's going to happen. And, we would go to dinner and, catch up and always checking in and seeing kind of where I was. And just over a year ago now, I sat down with him and told him that I was really serious about wanting to, move forward and kind of live out the succession plan that I think he had drummed up for so long. And so we started the process. And so based on that process, we had 3C House officially take over his book of business October 1st of 2024. And I feel very fortunate to already know all of the clients that he had. And I think have some pretty strong relationships with them, as, thankfully everybody renewed their contract and kept it with 3C as we could move forward. And Peter is still on with 3C House. And, it's funny, we joke that I used to work for him and now he gets to work for me. So it's just a fun dynamic, just a little bit swapped. And it's also fun to go back to all of the projects and the ideas that Peter and I had even back in 2018 and 19 and 20. And now really be able to sit down with this really robust team that we have and very experienced, very smart individuals who I'm very fortunate enough to have on my team. But to sit down and look at all those projects and go, we can do this now. We have the capacity to do it. We know what is, right during current, within these current events and where we want to take the association and where we want to take our members, as long as hopefully they're along for the ride. But, our very first thing right out of the gate was this big PR rebranding that we did. And, love Nevada Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association, but I frankly didn't want to say it when I went up to testify every single time.
It's a mouthful.
It's a little bit of a mouthful, but
it's a long acronym.
It's a little,
let alone name. Yeah.
The logo needed a little bit of tweaking too. It was a little blurry, but it was really fun to get the board involved in that process. And, us getting to take that in house and coming up with great ideas and then presenting it to the board and allowing them to decide what they want the future and what they want the legacy of this trade association be. And we wanted to make sure we got it done before the start of this session. And I'm really glad that we did. We have had so much positive feedback on the colors, on the new name, on the logo, because Nevada's in such an interesting current event space and energy. And we really are needing to kind of diversify our portfolio. And, not saying that like we have to have wind or we have to have solar, but diversification even from the logistics side and looking into like, what is the next thing? Like, what is the next Tesla? We're not quite sure yet. And how can convenience stores be continuing to expand and obviously staying in business? As the old adage goes, if you're not changing, you're dying. And we want to make sure that our trade association continues to change and continues to grow.
So just as a quick testimonial, because we talked about, your government affairs, lobbying effort, but you also kind of have this like marketing component to your agency. I think just using ECAN as an example, all those services were needed. Mm-hmm. Not only is there the government affairs piece, that's obvious. You want to monitor bills. You want to make sure you're doing your best to push bad legislation out or promote good legislation. But because it was a very old trade association, we hadn't spent a lot of time on branding. We hadn't spent a lot of time on logos, topography, everything else that goes into that. And then going out and getting that message out there on the PR side so that people understand what you do, what part of the business community that you represent, and why you have these strong opinions about these bills. So I feel like as a client, we got to see all of it come together and it went really, really well. Obviously, we gave our feedback and you guys just kind of came back with options and we're like, really like that. So thank you for doing that. I think it was long overdue, but like most things, you just get busy with the day to day and some of that stuff gets pushed aside. So it's nice that you guys have that built in internally to offer not only to us, but hopefully to other clients if they're receptive to it.
Absolutely. And really, my view of trade associations and any type of nonprofit is that you kind of got these three main groups. And without the first two, you can't make change in the third. And the first is your actual members and the people that you're representing in the board. The second is the stakeholders. And when I look at our stakeholders, it's the Department of Agriculture. It is, the governor's office. It is these people that, are out there as the city engineers making up things about how digital signs for gas stations can look and just allowed on, and alcohol and tobacco and gas prices and all that. But the third piece there is public and the public awareness. And you can't get public advocacy or even understanding or even trying to educate them without first having those two groups. I want to say kind of on your side. First one obviously has to be on your side, but the second, they have to at least know who you are. Yeah. And because Peter has done such an incredible job over the last 3 decades, really becoming the true expert and being known as the true expert in all things fuel, all things convenience. It's been, I don't want to say it's easy because nothing's ever easy, but it has been so natural to walk into these rooms to meet with the head of the Department of Agriculture and talk about convenience store signs and to have people that really are the ones who set all the different types of fuel revenue indexing, are the ones making those changes across the state, to simply be able to pick up the phone, send an email, and be able to have that very cordial conversation, as opposed to kind of having to either start brand new and there being struggles and there's not. And so we're really excited to take this association to the next level, which is educating the public. And, I'm sure people are always like, why are gas prices so high? Why is this happening? Why can't the convenience store lower them? And most of them don't understand that it's not the convenience store who's setting the price. They maybe are getting a couple pennies per gallon in revenue. And so it's things like that we want to be more proactive in, and getting a little bit more media attention, doing a little bit more of, Instagram, please follow us on Instagram. I'm really proud of what we're putting out, but also from the media side and putting out different educational opportunities and, talking to the media about gas prices. And we don't just want to be the call when there's an emergency about why is gas prices rising and fires in LA and how is that going to impact Nevada. We want to talk about the good things too, and the amazing things that our business owners all across the state are doing. And so that's kind of the next level that we see.
Perfect segue. And I'll probably pop in a nicotine here as you answer this question. We're fresh out of Nevada's biannual state legislature meeting, 4 months where they have the opportunity to push their bills through the House and the Senate, get it put into law in Nevada. We were monitoring 4 or 5 bills pretty closely. Some that we were in support of, others that we were in opposition of. Can you give us a brief breakdown on probably the one bill that we were actually monitoring that made its way through, and what happened at the end of the Nevada legislature that kind of put everything else on the backdrop?
Well, I will say I've never seen such a dramatic legislative session in all my years, which I know all of my years is nothing in comparison to some others, but we had, about 4 or 5 bills that we were really monitoring closely. One that was actually our bill, AB 29, which we worked hand in hand with the Department of Agriculture on to create a price conformity for all convenience stores across the state. Before, there was a lot of confusion about colors, sizing, just kind of the whole way that it looked. And now we have this conformity where both not only business owners understand it and know what is okay and what is not okay, but those that maybe don't follow it, it allows the Department of Agriculture to actually come in and say, hey, the sign is not correct. Because you always want to make sure on pricing signs, A, it's accurate, but also B, that it can be read. And so that was, thankfully not controversial. We got that bill through. It was signed by the governor. And that was one of our really biggest bills. And it was a big win for us this session.
Can I put that in the layman's terms real quick? And please correct me if I'm wrong. So if you're a convenience store owner, right, and you've got a price sign out there, I would argue that we're probably the most transparently priced industry out there. You've got one on every corner. There's been a law regarding sizes, colors, whatever, for signs. Over time, sign technology does evolve like any other form of technology. And as convenience store owners started to adopt some of this evolution, it puts them at odds with the regulators because the law really hasn't followed that technological advancement. And for a long time, the regulators kind of just give you a pass because they're like, well, yeah, they're not doing anything wrong. They're just using the new latest and greatest. And then at a certain point, enforcement enters the equation. And you're like, wait a minute, now I'm getting NOVs, violations, penalties, fines, whatever it may be. I'm not doing anything wrong per se. I'm just using the latest and greatest. So everybody takes a pause. We work with people like yourself to go, we really got to update the law so that it matches modern, sign technology so that our guys aren't getting penalized or fined for really not doing anything wrong, just trying to promote their business by putting good, transparent pricing out there. Fair?
Exactly. And I do just want to reiterate something that you mentioned, because again, it is not like any other industry that we truly are fully transparent on public street, on Main Street, anywhere, exactly what your price for gasoline is going to be. And, it's always funny to me when I'm driving down the street and you've got 3 convenience stores all within about, 100 feet of each other. And one of them may have a different price than the other 2, but you as the consumer get to choose where you decide to go. And there is no other industry in the entire country that's like that. And so I just want to reiterate that. But yes, in layman's terms, that's exactly what it does. It's really interesting, again, when we start talking about like digital signing, and how in main streets like downtown Reno and similarly down in the Las Vegas area, the cities have tried to create ordinances about how bright your digital sign could be. And so there's things like that even that we deal with quite a bit, because the city will call us convenience store owner will call us. And that's, when we get involved, most of the time, which, again, we've got great relationships, we'll have somebody from the city give us a heads up before they even call the convenience store owner to say, hey, this is potentially coming down the pike. And that's when we get to immediately get involved. And then we get to reach out to our members and also get them involved.
I mean, I think from their standpoint, they don't want a digital sign to be a distraction to the point of someone driving their car off the road. Totally get where they're coming from. You try to find a world where like both parties are happy. And I think, that's where you don't want to go into the conversation trying to win the debate every time as much as like, let's have a common sense conversation. These guys are trying to put their, product pricing up. We don't want that to be an inconvenience to the public. What's the perfect world right in the middle that we can get this thing updated so we're not working off, regulations or law from 4 years ago?
Exactly. And, one thing that was really interesting a few years ago that I got to work on was there was a new gas station that wanted to open up right in downtown Reno. Like, you've been to Reno, Midtown area. And
it's a cool area.
It is a great area. And at the moment, there is an ordinance that would not allow a digital sign. Now, there's one gas station that is directly next to the main South Virginia street in downtown. And when we're talking about safety, is this convenience store wanted to change their manual sign where someone goes up on a ladder, manually changes the numbers. They wanted to change to a digital sign. And the city was saying no because they believed it was going to be too bright for the residents down there. And our, argument was that it's safety. There had been a few times where the person on that ladder almost fell off the ladder. And if they had done so, they would have come right into oncoming traffic. Like, that's how close this sign was and is to the street, but yet we couldn't get the digital sign because the anti-digital sign group, which I still can't believe that there's an anti-digital sign group, but the anti-digital sign group was saying, no, the residents, it's not natural. That shouldn't happen. And so that's when we start having industry and businesses conflicting with, some of these other conservation type groups. But really, we were looking at it from a safety perspective.
We have a debacle going on right now regarding a sign in Nye County. Yeah, Tonopah, Nye County. It's not from like a regulator standpoint at all. It's we have an old sign, old school, where you put the numbers up every day. Not that hard during the summer, particularly harder during the winter in Tonopah. The land apparently was sold. We're trying to get a hold of the new landowner. Like, we want to give you money so that we can now put a digital sign up, and we can't get a hold of anybody who owns this land. So I don't know who it is. We still have a tangible sign up there that we're not using, and we want to put a new one up there. So if there's anybody in Tonopah who can help us out with this sign, we really appreciate it. But again, not from a regulator standpoint. It's just a small market, really tough to get in touch with anybody out there. All right, so moving on past the sign, a few other bills that we were watching. How come those didn't make it out?
One thing that's always funny is post-session, trying to explain, especially to clients, but even just kind of the general public who's not in the legislative building every day, the true dynamics of the legislature, because you don't really truly get it unless you're there constantly. And there was a lot of in-party fighting. So, just in case people don't know, the Senate and the Assembly are both currently controlled majority by Democrats. We, as the association, were working on some, we believe, very important bills, one of which was being sponsored by the Senate Majority Leader, which was the vape directory bill. And we had the votes for it. It passed out of the Senate. We worked very hard on the fiscal notes, knowing that from the enforcement piece, that was what was going to cost the most amount of money. We had all of the manufacturers on board for it, knowing that they were the ones who, had looked it over, had reviewed the language, were agreeing to it, as well as knowing they were going to be the ones to fund the project. We had it all straightened out. The bill got over to the Assembly side. And now this bill, because it's both policy and has fiscal notes and hits in a monetary way somehow, was going to have to go to at least 2 committees in each house. And so it went to one committee in the Senate, and then it went to the Money Committee, and it had to do the same thing on the Assembly side. And unfortunately, we got all the way to the Assembly side. We had the hearing in the Money Committee 2 days before the end of session. And on the final day, which we don't sign any die until 59 p.m., the Assembly Ways and Means Chair opted to not push it forward and not hold it for a vote, unfortunately, because of the inter-party fighting between her party and the Senate. And so we had some pretty unfortunate, I would call them losses, but also they're kind of a draw on many, many platforms between the legislation that just didn't get passed through the legislature because of that in-party fighting, but then also the Governor Lombardo, having a historical number of vetoes. I believe he vetoed 92 bills, and that is the most amount any one sitting governor had ever done, let alone one sitting governor in one session. And that's how many bills he vetoed just this session. Last session, he vetoed over 70. And so, a lot of us from business community, from union perspective, we're all kind of looking at this as a wash. And, again, it's interesting trying to explain some of those dynamics to the public. And then, even talking about the last day of session, it's, an hour before we're supposed to be done. And the Senate still has over 100 bills that they need to vote on. And they just keep taking recess after recess. We get 20 minutes to the end of the deadline. So it's 11:40 p.m. They take a recess, and 3 minutes later, they gavel back in. So the screen comes back on for those that are not currently sitting in the chamber, so they can watch it. And it's the Senate pro tem that has the lieutenant governor's gavel in her hand, gaveling back in.
Not the lieutenant governor.
Not the lieutenant governor. And then
he's the president of the Senate.
Who's the president of the Senate, who is in charge of all the proceedings. And again, we're 20 minutes before the end of session. This is unheard of.
With over 100 bills to review.
Over 100 bills to still try to pass. And a tweet goes out from the lieutenant governor himself saying that he had been locked out of the chambers.
I read it. I remember reaching out to you. I was like, what sort of shenanigans are going on up in Carson City right now?
Locked out. And so we had a Republican senator who, wonderful parliamentarian, amazing historian, stand up and say, where's the lieutenant governor? And it just started this, kind of fury ball from the Democrat side saying, well, we need to get going. So I stood up here and, let's do it. If you go back and watch that tape, which I have done, you can clearly see outside of the doors, because there's a glass window and then a glass window next to the doors. People are running around like their hair is on fire outside. I have never seen so much chaos in 20 minutes like that. And so finally, Lieutenant Governor comes back in. They recess, they gavel back in with him. Then the majority party introduces a Senate concurrent resolution to remove Republican votes from what would have been a stand-up vote. So in the Senate, there are 21 senators. Republicans have one Senate seat more than the Democrats having a supermajority. And a supermajority would allow the Democrats or whoever's in charge to pass any bill they want, regardless of
no veto,
regardless of the fee. And it would be very hard to keep it as a veto because they could come back and reverse it. And so Republicans having that one extra seat is vitally important to the legislative process. And the Democrats say that they want to remove a Republican from what would be a stand-up vote. Again, over 100 bills left to go. The way they're currently voting is by a push of a button. Every single senator has to do it, and that takes minutes every single time. So instead, they essentially wanted to be able to stand up and just pass it through. And it's funny because when they stood up to say what the bill does, which is required, they said, changes the makeup of the legislative commission, not removes Republican votes from the legislative commission. And so Senator Hansen once again stands up and starts saying, why are we not being given the opportunity to even discuss this bill? What are you doing? And it was so wild watching them go back and forth, trying to get the bill moved to be voted on, all of these things. And we don't have filibusters officially in the state of Nevada, but Senator Hansen did stand up for 15 minutes and just spoke on why this bill is wrong, why this is wrong to the democratic process, not being allowed to even know about the bill prior to them even introducing it. They weren't being allowed to have discussion on it. And so, obviously there's always a, kind of that political means to why they do things, which I fully respect. But we finally get about a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes before we are supposed to be done. So it is 11:57 p.m. And they finally call for the vote. Again, this vote has to be by push of a button because they did that. This was the bill to pass, being able to just stand up and do voting. Every single senator in that chamber pushed their button except for one sole Republican senator. And she waited until 12:0015. So we are now past the constitutional deadline of when we need to be done. And so then everybody stopped. We've got the assembly members waiting outside the door who who have already, quote, sine-died a few minutes earlier and waiting for the Senate to be done so that they can inform each other, which again, just part of the constitutional process. But they passed this bill. It, quote, passes because it didn't require a supermajority. And then Senator Hansen and a few of the others, other Republicans go, we need a legal opinion on this. Where's the parliamentarian? Because now, not only have we gone past the constitutional deadline of when the session is supposed to be over, we've now officially taken a vote past the constitutional deadline. And so I'm going to be really curious to see what happens. I definitely think this opens up the Democrat Senate for lawsuits, probably not even just one, possibly two.
Yeah. They
ended up not officially dying until like 12/25 because it took that long for legal and the parliamentarian to get together and talk and, go through things and then rush over to have the conversation with both the majority and the minority leaders and really try to get everybody on the same page about where they were at and then die, which it takes a minimum. If anybody's ever walked from the state legislature to the state capitol building, which is where the governor's office is, it is required that members from both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, have to physically walk across the Capitol grounds to the Capitol to physically inform the governor that session is over. That takes a minimum of 7 minutes to do. And so when you think about how at 11:58, they still weren't even in those proceedings, there was no way that constitutionally we were going to be done by midnight. And so that's where that's at. Hundreds of bills died on both sides because of constitutional issues, the in-party fighting, no one really knowing what's going on. And then we have 92 vetoes that come down the pike. Unfortunately, this session was pretty much a wash. And I am proud that there's a lot of anti-business, in my view, bad policy that either didn't
go through
or got vetoed. But unfortunately, if Governor Lombardo does not win, all of those bad bills that got vetoed are going to come back in 2027. And so I'm a huge advocate that having fairness in, both houses, I never believe it's good to have just one party solely in control. And I think we can use really any session in the last 10 years, whether it be 2015 with the commerce tax, all the way up to now. There should always be fairness and hopefully always a little bit of balance.
I agree very much so. Do you think they're going to go to a special session?
So while we did have the economic impact survey in April come out and say that Nevada was going to be in a pretty substantial deficit, I'm not seeing us actually going to be in a deficit. Not only did we move money out of the state general fund, we also moved money out of the state rainy day fund for a total of about $650 million. And at this moment, while yes, Nevada relies a lot on the federal government for Medicaid, Medicare, etc., we are not going to know about that until August at the very earliest when the federal government is done with their budget. And only then will we decide whether or not we need to go into a special session. So if the budget from the feds looks, I'd say, bad for Nevada, high likelihood that we go into a special in October.
So all eyes on the big, beautiful bill.
All eyes on the big, beautiful bill. I love the big, beautiful bill minus one provision in it, which you can actually put out a social media kind of alert on it the other day. But there's a tobacco agriculture piece in that bill, which would remove the duty drawback program, which frankly would be devastating to our farmers of tobacco across the country. And so if we could get that one provision removed, I think the bill should just pass.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so perfect segue then. I think we can end on this. Current events. It was a wild weekend. What's today, June 23rd?
June 23rd.
Trump has said that he wants the big, beautiful bill out of the Senate, hopefully approved by both sides before July 4th. We'll see. I think the events over the weekend may disrupt some of the party lines. Obviously, you have some on the Democrats that were supportive, that finally there was a hard line that was drawn with Iran, which is that we will not allow a nuclear program or nuclear capabilities. I think a nuclear program is more of an ideology. I don't know how you kill an ideology, but you certainly can kill capabilities. And I think they did a pretty good job of doing that over the weekend with a wild military action. I think that'll probably go down in the history books. In my opinion, or for our industry, sky high oil prices isn't good. I mean, it might be good if you're in the production game or in the refining game, but what we see is construction companies, mining companies, convenience stores, they typically have credit limits. You work on credit, you deliver fuel, they pay you 10 days later, could be a net 15 or a net 30. But if all of a sudden the amount of fuel that they go through, their bill doubles, customers are typically slower to pay their bills, and that can put you in a hard position of, hey, I can no longer deliver to you until you pay us for the last load. That can disrupt a business relationship. It's also a lot more expensive. I mean, typically that's one of your highest operating expenses. Could be your third, fourth, or fifth highest operating expense. Now, all of a sudden, your 20,000 gallons of diesel fuel a month is twice as expensive. So we don't want to see crude oil going above $100 a barrel. It hurts our business. It hurts our customers' businesses. But I also think it hurts his agenda for the administration. So what do you see coming out of all the geopolitics? Do you think that we're going to get to world peace, or do you think that we're going to get to World War III? If you had to weigh both sides of that argument.
If I was running for Miss America, obviously I would have to say I want world peace, which obviously I always hope for, but unfortunately that's just not realistic. Any type of war, any type of conflict that's going to be happening, especially in countries that control oil, that we get oil from, that we import and export with, is absolutely going to impact oil prices. And again, it's so important that people hopefully kind of understand what it is that a barrel of oil costs, and then how it's going to impact the gallon of gas that they're going to go buy at their local convenience store.
Or your groceries.
Which
or home construction costs, basically everything.
Exactly. And so many of our convenience stores across the state of Nevada, that truly is the grocery store for the local people that live there. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize. They don't have Kroger's and Raley's that, are in every single small town across our state. It's a lot of convenience stores. And so they rely on fresh produce, and they rely on gas to hopefully stay about the same price. And so between what's going on nationally, and then you start talking about, stateside and what we're looking at from California. I mean, Nevada, again, we're an island, and we've got to figure out our own energy policy. But if we don't start figuring something out, gas prices are going to start skyrocketing. And yes, world events always are going to impact what we're doing. But I think we need to start taking a little bit more control of our own destiny and deciding who it is that we want to be when we grow up.
I agree. And I think that was probably our primary narrative when we went to DC. As much as we were talking about a lot of these bills that were in session at the time, I think the main focus was, hey, California has taken a very aggressive approach. They're very anti-fossil fuel. They pushed some things through last year that our governor forecasted, the Democratic governor of Arizona forecasted, and the business environment also forecasted this is going to be really bad for big oil. And if you do this, you could force big oil companies out of California. The unfortunate part is 88% of our refined fuel comes from California. Arizona also to a large degree, not as much as us, but if two refineries, Phillips and Valero, go offline at the end of 25 and at the end of 26, that brings offline 22% of California's refining capacity. And demand doesn't change, which means you're bringing in tankers of refined product from the Asian market or all the way from the Gulf Coast market. And if people are concerned about what's going on in the Middle East right now, I think you should be equally concerned about Taiwan. Not only for like the semiconductors and how that would impact our modern way of life. I think that if China takes Taiwan, that would create a tremendous amount of leverage for the Asian markets to de-dollar, which would be destabilizing to the United States dollar. And if California refineries are going offline and you're relying on the Asian market to supply, it could even be worse than the USC Professor Misch has targeted, which was mid $8 for California for a gallon of gas, and anywhere between $6 and $7 in Nevada. So one of the things that we had proposed is that you now have a federal government that's working with the Department of Interior, EPA, and Energy, trying to create a regulatory environment where you can build infrastructure quickly. I mean, America needs transmission lines. America needs mining. We also need to be able to process the materials that we mine, not just mine it here, ship it to China, get it produced, and bring it back. So if you have a federal government that's open to clearing up all the red tape, and if Nevada and the surrounding states are looking for additional refining sources, you're not so heavily weighted and dependent on California. I hope that California wakes up one day. I think it's the most beautiful state in our union, best weather. My family goes down there to vacation. I'm a big fan of California as a state. I'm not a fan of California politics. I think it's horrible for the business environment. I can't imagine being a resident of San Francisco and LA, loving your city and seeing what it's turned into. So I hope they turn it around, but if they don't, Nevada's got to wisen up and say, hey, there are other refining sources out there. Holly Frontier built a pipeline from Utah to Nevada. It took them 4 years, $300 million, and they built 2 terminals. So if you don't have a 2008 regulatory environment, you could theoretically get things done a lot quicker. So hopefully these conversations are happening outside of just you and I, sounding our alarm bell, and, they take it seriously, because $6 to $7 for a gallon of gas, I can guarantee you that's a bipartisan issue in the state of Nevada. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, people are going to be unhappy with you if you allow this to happen. So please, if you're an elected representative, start having conversations and try to decouple us from the refining capacity in California, because that's going down.
I don't know if I can say anything else to that. You did so well. But one thing I will just reiterate is on the mining processing side, a lot of people don't realize how long it actually takes from the time that the ore is processed out of the ground. And so, something like what you and I saw, which is in, kind of gold and silver flakes and all of that, to the time it's processed, which many times does have to be shipped out of the country because Nevada doesn't have any of its own processing facilities. It could take 6 to 18 months for that product to actually show back up in the United States and be ready to go wherever it's going for whatever purpose. And that's for anything. That's for lithium, that obviously huge international conversation right now. That's for diatomaceous earth that you use in pool filters, and it's kitty litter and all of these other things. And that's gold and silver and copper as well. And so when you start talking about higher prices of gas and higher prices of thus logistics, you're talking about a higher price for everything across the board.
Yeah, and you may or may not be able to actually mine at a profit when those costs go up. Some of those mines go through a lot of fuel. I mean, that is diesel fuel, lubricants, that's what keeps the machinery going so that they can actually mine. And we actually deal with the only rare earth mining company here on the West Coast out of Mountain Pass in California. And yes, everything is mined in the United States, but it is processed overseas. And 18-month turnaround time when there is no geopolitical conflict going on around Taiwan. So that's definitely something that we should watch, considering China said they'll invade Taiwan by 2027. Scary times.
It is scary times. And I just think it's so important that people just really need to understand where our products are coming from, and that it's not as simple as saying that we need to have, renewables. Renewables can definitely be part of the solution, but oil, gas, propane, natural gas, it's not going away. And it truly is the most reliable source that we have. So trying to outlaw oil, trying to outlaw fuel, trying to outlaw combustible engines doesn't make any sense, minimum for the next 100 years. Maybe in, 50 years from now, someone will come up with something that will revolutionize the industry. But this truly is the best and cleanest source of energy that we have. And so whether it's, understanding the way gas prices actually work, or it's even understanding how much a mining company actually makes on an ounce of silver, because those are actually very similar parallels. Mining companies are not just making millions or even billions of dollars over and above their expenses. It's actually very little.
And it's dependent on the commodity price.
Very dependent on the commodity price, just like oil and gases. And so when you look at those two items, again, they're very parallel. And I think it's important for consumers to understand that, we're not just like a one-trick pony here. We really are here to stay, keep our people safe, continuously be innovative and having great ideas and trying to do what's best, not only for our customers, our consumers, and our own teams and our own people, but for our states and frankly, for the country.
In my opinion, I think you should appreciate the fact that we're here in America for many reasons, but one of the reasons is the raw materials that we have here. I think every country should take a hard look at what raw materials do we have and what internal capabilities do we have surrounding those raw materials. If we've learned anything post-2020, I think is that globalization is dead. Just-in-time inventory and offshoring, that might work if there's, no net trade barriers or there's no wars going on, but the history of the world works differently than that. And there are trade barriers and there are wars going on, and we have had supply chain disruptions. And luckily, we're in America where there's a lot of raw materials that we should be accessing safely and responsibly. And there's some areas of the economy where we have some significant gaps And I think that we need to close those gaps as quickly as possible considering world events. So that's just my 2 cents on it. Miranda, I will say this. Thank you very much for doing this. Had a pleasure doing it.
My pleasure. Super, super fun. Appreciate you having me on.
I'll have you on again, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Jobbers, American Energy. If today's episode gave you a new perspective or reminded you why this work matters, leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. It really does help support the show. For more episodes and resources, visit jobberspodcast.com. Until next time.